Bullies trip him, they didn't know he's a jiu-jitsu champion just holding back to kneel. Matthews kept his head down as he walked through the crowded hallways of Lincoln High School, his worn sneakers making barely a whisper against the polished floors. At 15, he stood just 5'4" and tall and weighed maybe 120 lbs. Soaking wet, his sandy brown hair hung loosely over his forehead, partially hiding pale green eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing. Most students at Lincoln didn't even notice him, which was exactly how Daniel preferred it. What they couldn't see beneath his oversized flannel shirts and faded jeans was 8 years of Brazilian jiu-jitsu training. What they didn't know is that his quiet demeanor came not from weakness but from the discipline his sensei had drilled into him since age 7. What they couldn't understand was that Daniel chose silence because he knew exactly what he was capable of. Just get through today, Daniel whispered to himself as he navigated toward his locker. Lincoln High housed over 1,800 students, most of whom had grown up together in this small Pennsylvania town. Being the new kid already made him stand out, but being small and quiet made him something else entirely. A target the first person to notice Daniel was unfortunately Brett Henderson, a 6'2" senior who played varsity football and ruled the school through intimidation, and his father's money. Brett had thick dark hair, broad shoulders, and the cocky smile of someone who had never faced real consequences. Two closest friends were Ryan Walsh, a stocky wrestler with mean eyes, and Tyler Brooks, a tall basketball player. Followed Brett's lead without question. It started small, a shoulder check in the hallway. "Watch it, shrimp," Brett would mutter as Daniel stumbled. Snickers when he walked past their table in the cafeteria, whispered comments about his size, his thrift store clothes, apparent weakness. Daniel absorbed it all without reaction, his face a mask of calm that only frustrated Brett more. "What's wrong with this kid?" Brett complained to Ryan after Daniel failed to respond to being called mouse for the 5th time that week. "It's like he doesn't even care. If only you knew," Daniel thought. His sensei had taught him that true strength meant choosing your battles wisely. A real warrior doesn't fight to prove himself, he fights online when all other options are exhausted. So Daniel endured. He endured having his backpack knocked off his shoulder. He endured finding his locker vandalized with cruel messages. He endured Brett's group blocking his path to class, forcing him to be late and face teachers' deprivation. Incidents escalated quickly in the cafeteria. Ryan would accidentally bump his tray, sending food flying in gym class. Tyler would throw dodgeballs directly at his head with unnecessary force. Brett orchestrated it all with calculated cruelty, always careful to maintain plausible deniability. "Doesn't even fight back," Brett complained to his girlfriend Ashley during lunch. "What kind of guy just takes it?" Ashley frowned, pushing her salad around her plate. "Maybe you should leave him alone." "Brett, he's not bothering Ganyan." Brett's expression darkened. "That's the problem. He acts like he's above it all, like he's better than you. And needs to teach him his place." Daniel heard every word from three tables away, his enhanced awareness drained through years of sparring pick-it-up conversations. Others missed. He felt his jaw clench, then forced himself to relax. Control, he reminded himself, always control, but control became harder as 2 weeks passed. The bullying moved beyond school grounds when Brett's group started following him home, shouting insults from car windows. They create fake social media accounts to post humiliating memes. They spread rumors that he was mute on medication, that his family was involved in drugs. The teachers seemed oblivious or unwilling to intervene. Mrs. Rodriguez would look away when Brett made comments during his story. Class coach Martinez never noticed when Ryan deliberately fouled him during basketball. Even Principal Williams would simply nod and keep walking when witnessing a vicious harassment. They're all part of the same system. Daniel realized bitterly. Brett's dad owns half the businesses in town. I'm just some transfer student. Breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in November. Daniel was walking to English class when he saw Brett's group positioned near the main stairwell. Brett leaned against the wall with his trademark smirk while Ryan and Tyler flanked the narrow passage. Daniel considered turning around, but he was already late for a test. Just walked past him. he told himself as Daniel approached Brett, stepping directly into his path. Well, if it isn't our favorite little mouse. Brett said loudly, his voice carrying across the hallway. How's your day going, Danny boy? Daniel kept his eyes forward and tried to step around, but Ryan blocked his movement. Brett asked you a question, freak. Ryan growled, I'm fine. Daniel said quietly, his voice steady, despoteth adrenaline beginning to course through his veins. Excuse me? Brett's grin widened. Did you guys hear that the mouse actually spoke? Several students stopped to watch forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Daniel felt the familiar heat rising in his chest, his breathing becoming deeper and more controlled. A warning sign he recognized from countless hours on the mat. He need to get to class. He said class. Brett pretended to consider this. Well, maybe you should have thought about that for being such a stuck-up little weirdo. What happened next occurred in slow motion. Brett nodded to Ryan, who was positioned behind Daniel. Ryan's foot shot out in a perfectly timed leg sweep, catching Daniel's ankle as he stepped forward. Daniel felt himself falling, his backpack flying open as he tumbled. The concrete stairs, his jiu-jitsu training kicked in automatically, his body twisted mid-air, hands shooting out to break his fall core, engaging to protect his spine. He hit the ground hard but controlled, rolling to absorb the impact instead of fighting it around him. Students burst into laughter. Brett's voice rose above the rest. Oops, guess the mouse isn't very coordinated. He lay surrounded by scattered bellowings and mocking laughter. His English notebook was torn and dirty. His calculator lay with its screen cracked, but what hurt most wasn't the physical impact, it was seeing Ashley cover her mouth. Not in shock at the cruelty, but to hide her own laughter. It was students pulling out phones to record his humiliation. It was realizing that Totham, he wasn't human, he was entertainment. Something snapped. Daniel rose with fluid grace that caught several students off guard. His movements were suddenly different, more purposeful, controlled. He dusted off his jeans deliberately, then began collecting his belongings with methodical calm that was pretty clumsy. Mouse boy. Brett continued performing for his audience. Maybe you should watch where you're. Daniel straightened and looked directly at Brett. For the first time in 2 months, what Brett saw in those pale green eyes made him take an involuntary step backward. My name, Daniel said in a voice that carried clearly through the sudden quietness. Daniel Matthews. The laughter died instantly, something in his tone, his posture made everyone pay attention. Brett recovered quickly, his face flushing with embarrassment. I don't care what your name is, freak, you're still a tomorrow. Daniel interrupted, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made several students shift uncomfortably. After school, the empty lot behind the gym. Brett blinked, certain he'd misheard. What you want to finish this? Daniel asked, shouldering his damaged backpack with movements that seemed somehow dangerous. Then let's finish it, just you and me. Ryan laughed nervously. Is the little mouse trying to sound tugged? Daniel's gaze shifted to Ryan, and Therisler felt an unexpected chill run down his spine. If you want to make it 2-1, that's your choice, but know that I won't hold back anymore. The word anymore hung in there like a threat. In pleading capabilities, none of them had suspected Brett's face was red, trapped by his reputation. And the crowd of students watching expectantly. You're crazy if you think I'm wasting time fighting some scrawny transfer student, then stop bothering me. Daniel said simply, your choice. He turned and walked away, leaving Brett standing with his mouth open and his friends looking uncertain. Words spread through Lincoln High like wildfire. The quiet new kid had challenged Brett Henderson by day, and Deverian was talking about it. Some students were excited to see Brett finally tested. Others were planning to record what they assumed would be an inevitable beatdown. That evening, Daniel spent time in his family's basement gym, a small space with mats, a heavy bag, and basic training equipment. His father, Michael Matthews, watched from the doorway as Daniel worked through his usual routine. Something happened today. Michael observed. Daniel paused in his stretching. Challenged someone to a fight. Michael nodded slowly. And why? Because ignoring them wasn't working anymore. Daniel replied. They tripped me in front of half the school today. Ryan laughed. And tomorrow you're going to hurt this boy? Daniel considereth question carefully. I'm going to defend myself. What happens to him depends on how far he wants to take it, Michael smiled. Slightly your control has always been your greatest strength, son, but remember, once you show them what you can do, there's no going back good, Daniel said, surprising himself with the vehemence. I'm tired of buying Ginvaboth. Next day, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Students who'd never spoken to Daniel were asking questions. Was he really going to fight Brett? Did he know Brett outweighed him by 60 pounds? Had he ever fought before? Neil answered none of them, maintaining his quiet demeanor, but something was different, now something that made distance step aside. When he walked the hallways, he moved with the same controlled grace, but now it seemed less like timidity and more like toilet potential. Brett struggled with the situation. He couldn't back down without losing face, but something about Daniel's demeanor had unsettled him. He found himself studying the smaller boy during their shared classes, looking for signs of hidden strength that has probably never been in a real fight. Ryan assured him during lunch, "You're going to destroy him." "I know that," Brett snapped, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. The flannel bell rang at 3:15, and by 3:30 nearly 60 students had gathered in the empty lot behind the gymnasium. The space was hidden from the main buildings by trees, making it perfect for unofficial conflicts. Arrived exactly on time, still wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, still looking like the same quiet kid who'd absorbed abuse for months. He walked to the center of the lot and waited, hands at his sides, breathing steady and controlled. Brett showed up 5 minutes later with Ryan and Tyler flanking him like bodyguards. He changed into athletic shorts and a tank top, clearly expecting the physical confrontation. Size difference was immediately apart. Brett had at least 6 in and 40 pounds on. Daniel last chance to apologize. A free act, Brett called out as he approached Etsy. "You're sorry for wasting everyone's time, and maybe I'll go easy on you." Neil looked around at the crowd, many with phones ready to record. He thought about months of harassment, humiliation, where they'd all stood by and watched it. Then he looked back at Brett. "No," he said simply. Brett's face darkened. "Fine, have it your way." He rushed forward with straightforward aggression that had intimidated smaller kids for years. His plan was simple: grab Daniel, throw him down, let his size advantage do the rest. Daniel saw him coming with the clarity that came from hundreds of hours off sparring. As Brett reached for him, Daniel stepped slightly aside and dropped his center of gravity. Brett's momentum carried him forward into empty air, and Daniel's hand shot out to grab his wrist. What happened next was poetry in motion, executed with the precision of years off training. Daniel pulled on Brett's wrist while simultaneously stepping behind him and sweeping his leg. Brett's feet went out from under him, and he found himself airborne before crashing hard onto thick dirt. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent shock waves through his back. The crowd gasped collectively. Brett had gone from attacking to flat on his back in less than 2 seconds. "What the hell?" Brett wheezed. Struggling to breathe, Daniel stood over him, perfectly balanced, not even breathing hard. "Get up." Brett scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and growing anger. "You got lucky, you little." He swung a wild high maker at Daniel's head, putting all his strength behind it. Daniel ducked under the punch, smoothly stepped inside Brett's guard and wrapped his arms around his waist before the bigger boy could react. Daniel had lifted him off his feet and driven him back down with a perfectly executed double leg takedown. This time Daniel followed Brett to the ground. The watching students saw Brett disappear under Daniel's compact frame. Suddenly they were witnessing something none had expected. This wasn't a bigger kid beating up a smaller one. This was a technical dismantling of everything Brett thought he knew about fighting. Daniel secured side control, his weight distributed perfectly across Brett's torso, making it impossible for the larger boy to bridge or roll. Brett tried to push him off, but Daniel moved with his efforts flowing from position to position like water. "Let me up." Brett grunted, his voice tight with panic as he realized he couldn't move. "Are ya going to leave me alone?" Daniel asked calmly, maintaining perfect control. "Screw you." Daniel transitioned smoothly to mount, settling his weight across Brett's hips. The bigger boy bucked and thrashed, but Daniel wrote out every movement with ease. Ryan, watching his friend get dominated, decided to intervene. "Get off him," he shouted, rushing toward the fight. Daniel saw him coming in his peripheral vision. With releasing Brett, he shifted his weight and caught Ryan's ankle as the wrestler tried to kick him. A simple twist and pull sent Ryan crashing to the ground beside them, where Daniel immediately trapped him in a triangle choke using his legs while maintaining control of Brett with his arms. Now both bullies were trapped, Ryan's air supply being cut off while Brett remained pinned and helpless. "Holy crap," someone whispered as controlling both of them. Tyler took a step forward but stopped when Daniel's cold gaze fixed on him. Something in those eyes promised there was room for one more if Tyler wanted to test his luck. Tyler wisely stayed where he was. Ryan was beginning to turn red from the choke, his hands plugging desperately at Daniel's legs. Daniel held submission for a few more seconds, long enough to make his point, then released it. Ryan rolled away, gasping and cuffing. Brett had stopped struggling and was staring up at Daniel with shock and growing fear. "How are you doing this?" he whispered. "8 years of Brazilian jiu-jitsu," Daniel replied conversationally. "My father taught method. Fighting is about technique, not size." Several students pulled out Finesto search for information about the martial art within seconds. Some echoed out, "Holy crap, Brazilian jiu-jitsu is what they use in the UFC. It's specifically designed to let smaller people be bigger ones." Their revelation rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Daniel wasn't just some quiet transfer student. He was a trained fighter who had been holding back this entire time. Brett's face had gone pale beneath Daniel's weight. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Daniel said, his voice still calm but carrying years of suppressed frustration. "You never bothered to know anything about me. You just saw someone quiet and small and decided I'd make a good target." He leaned closer, his voice dropping so only Brett could hear. "Brothers, what you're going to learn today, being quiet doesn't mean being weak, and being small doesn't mean being helpless." Daniel stood up smoothly, releasing Brett entirely. The bigger boy scrambled backward on his hands and knees, putting distance between himself and this person who had just completely upended his understanding of the world. "This iceover," Daniel announced to the crowd. "Anyone who has a problem with me can discuss it face like a human being. Anyone who thinks they can bully him or anyone else at this school." He looked directly at Ryan, who was still cowing and holding his throat. "Well, you've seen what happens." He picked up his backpack and started walking toward the school building. The crowd parted bare him like the Red Sea. "Wait," Brett called out, his voice cracking. Daniel turned back, one eyebrow raised. Brett struggled to his feet, his clothes dirty and his dignity in shambles. Around him, students were still recording, still taking pictures, still discussing what he'd just witnessed. By tomorrow, Varian at Lincoln High would know exactly what had happened. "Eddie," Brett started, then stopped. He looked around at the crowd, at his friends, avoiding his gaze at Ashley, staring at him with something that might have been pity. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words coming out in a rush for everything, the tripping the namesal of it. I mean, you were just being a bully," Daniel said simply, "but you can choose to be something else." He turned and walked away, leaving Brett standing in the lot, surrounded by the scattered pieces of his former reputation. The changes at Lincoln High were immediate and dramatic. By the next morning, video clips of the fight had spread throughout the school's social media. Students who had never given Daniel a second glance were now approaching him with respect, curiosity, and requests for self-defense advice. Brett found himself in the unfamiliar position of being the one people whispered about. The story had grown into telling. Some versions had Daniel submitting all 3 bullies simultaneously. Others claimed he'd learned his skills from military trainers, but the most significant change was in Brett himself. The humiliation of being dominated in front of half the school had shattered something in his worldview. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be powerless, to be at someone else's mercy. 3 days after the fight, Brett found Daniel eating lunch alone in the library. "Can I sit?" Brett asked quietly. Daniel looked up from his chemistry textbook. and gestured to the empty chair. Brett sat down heavily, his usual swagger completely absent. "I wanted to thank you," he said after a moment. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Thank me for not hurting me worse than you did, for not humiliating me more than you had to." Brett's voice was subdued. "I've been thinking about what you said about choosing to be something else, Brett. Waski, for a long moment I talked to my girlfriend about what I did to you, about what I've been doing to kids like yo for years. She told me she'd be an embarrass to be with me for months." Daniel waited, saying nothing. "I also talked to my dad," Brett continued, "told him what happened, what I'd been doing. Brett's voice cracked slightly. "He was ashamed of me, said he didn't raise me to be a coward. Who picks on people smaller than me? Your father's right," Daniel said simply. "I know." Brett looked directly at Daniel. "I want to do better. You want to be better. I just don't know how." Neil considered this. "Start by apologizing to everyone you've hurt, not just me, all of them. Then spend time thinking about why you felt the need to hurt people in the first place." Brett nodded slowly. "And if some of them don't want to forgive me, then you live with that." Daniel replied, "That's part of being accountable for your choices." Over the following weeks, Lincoln High settled into a new equilibrium. Brett kept his word, seeking out students he'd tormented and offering sincere apologies. Some accepted them, others didn't. Had joined the school's peer mediation program and started volunteering at a local youth center. Ryan and Tyler gave Daniel a wide berth but stopped their harassment of other students entirely. Word had spread about Daniel's training and the knowledge that a skilled fighter was watching served as a powerful deterrent. Daniel found that his life at Lincoln had changed completely. Students who had once looked through him now nodded respectfully when he passed. Teachers who had ignored the bullying made efforts to include him in discussions. He even received an invitation to join the wrestling team, though he politely declined. "Why don't you want to compete?" Coach Martinez asked. Daniel thought about it. "Because I didn't learn to fight to win tournaments," he said finally. "I learned to protect myself and others." "There's a difference," the coach nodded, seeming to understand something important in that distinction. On a Friday afternoon in December, Daniel was walking to his car when he saw a familiar scene playing out near the school's front entrance. A group of sophomore football players had cornered a thin freshman, shoving him back and forth while laughing at his attempts to retrieve scattered homework. Daniel paused, watching the freshman look terrified, but was trying to stand up for himself, much as Daniel had 4 months before reaching his breaking point. Not anymore. Daniel thought. He looked over with the same controlled confidence he'd discovered weeks earlier. "Is there a problem here?" he asked calmly. The sophomores turned to look at him, their expressions shifting from amazement to uncertainty as they recognized him. Everyone at Lincoln knew Daniel Matthews now. "No problem," the parent leader said quickly. "We were just messing around. It doesn't look like he's having fun." Daniel observed, nodding toward the freshman still gathering papers. The sophomore looked between Daniel and his friends, calculating odds. He didn't like whatever. "This is boring anyway." They walked away without another word, leaving Daniel and the freshman alone. Daniel knelt down and helped gather the scattered homework, handing the papers to the younger boy with a slight smile. "Yeah, okay," the freshman nodded gratefully. "Thanks, I'm Kevin, by the way." Daniel and Kevin. "If they bother you again, come find." Kevin's eyes widened slightly. Really, nobody should have to deal with that alonius." Daniel walked to his car. He reflected on how much had changed since that day in November when Brett's group had tripped him near the stairwell. He discovered that strength wasn't just about knowing how to fight, it was about choosing when to fight, and more importantly, choosing what to fight for. It also learned that sometimes the only way to stop being a victim was to refuse to be one, regardless of the consequences. The skills his father had taught him were just tools. What mattered was having the courage to use them when necessary. Most importantly, he realized that true strength meant protecting others, not just himself. The quiet kid who had once absorbed abuse and silence had become someone others could count on for protection and justice. As he drove home, Daniel smiled slightly, thinking about his father's reaction when he told him about the confrontation with the sophomores. Michael would be proud. not just of his son's fighting skills, but of his judgment in using them. A true warrior doesn't fight to prove himself. Daniel remembered his father saying he fights only when fighting is the only option left. O'Day, fighting had been the only option left for Kevin, and Daniel had been there too, provided the transformation was complete. The mouse had become the lion, but more importantly, the victim had become the protector.